Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. Longtime listeners of this podcast know that one of the things I'm really interested in is how do we take historical record from the 1580s and then translate it to a modern audience in a style that's entertaining. In short, how do you go from a 1570 musical record and make that entertaining to a 21st century audience? In shorter, how do you make period entertaining? I was talking with Simon Spalding, and he said, you know who would really be really good at that? You really should talk to Shirleigh Brannon. And then I said, and Mark Sellin really knows that too. So a couple of phone calls and hurricanes later, we assembled Shirleigh and Mark, along with Simon again, to explore in depth what makes a good period show at a Renaissance fair. Now first, let's meet the panel. First off, Mark Sellin. Mark and I grew up about 10 blocks from each other, and with his parents and his two sisters, he had a musical quintet where he played the cello. Some of the earliest photos of Mark at the Renaissance Fair have him playing a fiddle between his legs. In later years, out at the fair, he has started a group called the Story Wrens, where he plays the tenor mandolin, cello, and fiddle, and arranges and sings many of their songs. Previously, he played and recorded with a folk band, Fine Companions. Theatrically, he has co-authored 10 stage plays, directed and performed on stage well over 1,000 times at Renaissance pleasure fairs. To hear examples of Mark's work online, go to Spotify, hit playlist, type in Mark Sellin, Sellin, sings, and there will be a potpourri of his singing and arrangement and musical playing all there online. Hey, Mark, how's it going?
Very well, Dan. Thanks for having me. Yeah, nice to be here with this panel.
The second person on our panel is Simon Spalding. While Mark was living 10 blocks from me, Simon Spalding was living and growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area, about 350 miles to the north. When he was growing up in the streets of San Francisco, he heard Italian from his landlady and Cantonese Chinese from his friends in the playground. With these sounds growing up around him, Simon has evolved into a fiddler and multi-instrumentalist who has worked at the Dickens Christmas Fair, Old San Francisco Fair, and Renaissance pleasure fairs from 1974 to 1997. He has worked at 11 Dickens fairs, 13 Southern fairs, and 18 Northern fairs. He has assembled and directed ensembles of Irish and Scottish musicians and dancers for Renaissance fair shows for, you insert the Clan Colin and others from 1976 to 1981. Simon studied ethnomusicology with Dr. Bonnie Wade at UC Berkeley, graduating in 1979. He has also performed and directed shows for other Renaissance events in San Diego, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Minnesota, Kansas City, Louisiana, New York, and North Carolina. And he actually has a website, www.musicalhistorian.com. And last but not least, we have our third panelist, Shirleigh Brannon. She grew up furthest away from all of us, half a continent away in Southwest Ohio. She grew up in a folk and music and dance family where relatives and friends gathered to play, sing, and dance to music, ranging from Appalachian, country western, and old pop hits from the 30s and 40s. The first in her family to go to college, She went to Oberlin, where she hung around with conservatory students and worked as a theater technician for various operas, and in grad school, specialized in Irish theater and writing her master's and PhD thesis on aspects of Irish theater. What was your thesis on, Shirley?
My master's thesis was on the Carey playwright George Fitzmaurice, who was alive at the same time as Sean O'Casey and James Singh and all that lot. And so my thesis was specifically on George Fitzmaurice and his folkloric plays and styles and how he wrote, in comparison very specifically with Sean O'Casey, who was living in France by that point in time and was writing from this very urban perspective. So juxtaposing these men, one of whom is still famous, one of whom is very obscure, and their writing styles.
So you get the Academia Award for the panel. So congratulations ahead of time.
Oh, my doctoral dissertation was on Irish fringe theater post Beckett.
Well, very cool. Shirley has participated in various Irish and Scottish music and dance shows at various venues for over 4 decades, including as a dance director, show director, dance teacher, choreographer, and still she performs and plays Irish and Scottish music on an ad hoc basis with various groups. She has also led Irish dance workshops for beginners at various folk music camps off and on since the 1980s. Hi, Shirley.
Hi.
So, Mark, why don't you start us off and answer the basic question? A wide-eyed youngin comes up to you after a show at the Renaissance Fair and says, Mark, how do I make a period show really entertaining?
That's a very hard question. Let me take it a couple of different ways. If there's good support in the venue, if it's a theatrically, historically oriented venue, then that's one thing. Then if you make a period show and keep it lively, then that will fit the theme and will be supported. If, however, it's not so theatrical, not so historical, then you will probably need to be less authentic. And I would say drinking songs, barn burners, keep it simple. If you're going to be historical and you're going to work with that music, that's one thing. That's one approach, and that's the approach that interests me. But there's another way of looking at this, and that is you're there to show people a good time. And if the event is not fundamentally theatrical or historical, that's going to be a different sort of performance.
Can I break in and ask a question?
Of course.
When you first walk on a fair you've never been at before, what makes you go, uh-oh, this is not a period fair? Or what makes you go, oh, they get it. I'm going to have to up my periodness.
I never worry about that question, Dan.
Okay,
We're there to do the best reasonably period music we can, translated, and we love it if the venue supports. And generally, putting on a Renaissance fair is a labor of love anyway. If someone's going to create a nice sandbox for us, we're not going to worry too much. If if there's a beautiful pavilion with hay bales and nice Elizabethan timbers and so forth, or whether there's a generator in the distance, we're just happy to be there. And if we fit into that theatrical setting, wonderful. Otherwise, we see ourselves as, well, we're a relatively authentic act that the organizers can point to and say, oh, if you want to see Shakespeare, go see the Shakespeare show. If you want to see some traditional music, go see that show. And then we're the setting to hang the rest of the event off of. That's how I see it.
cool. Simon, what's your answer to the wide-eyed innocent?
Well, I'm going to tweak your question just slightly in a direction that I can answer better, which is, over the years, I've been approached by lots of wide-eyed, aspiring musicians saying, "Hey, I want to play at the Ren Fair. I want to be part of this thing. What would I do?" And the first and most fundamental thing I would tell someone who wants to be a dance musician, to address the earlier part of your question, how can I make me seem better than I am, is for a dance musician is take a little time during those practices to learn the dances. I would say almost with no exceptions I can think of, the best, the strongest dance musicians, they're not necessarily the flashiest musicians, but the strongest dance musicians I know and the most versatile ones are ones who also do some dancing. It also behooves a dancer to try their hand a little bit with the music, even if it's just a little bit. But in the tradition you're doing, you will be a better Irish dance musician if you've at least tried to do a little Cayley dance. You might not be able to step dance, but if you understand what threes and sevens are, if you've actually done it, one of the things I've noticed with this, which has at least made me a better dance musician, is having done it. If I'm watching dancers, I can tell just looking at them if they're struggling to keep up with music that's too fast or struggling to dance to music that's too slow. There's no reading the signs. It's just intuitive. This tempo needs to change. And so a lot of times, if I got a signal from dancers, I had already anticipated it because I could tell they were struggling with that. So that is one of the best things you can do. If you're an aspiring musician, maybe you may only know 12 Irish or Scottish songs that are dance tunes, you will play them better if you try your hand at dancing.
Shirley, I saw you nodding up and down and giving a big thumbs up while Simon was talking.
I absolutely agree with what Simon said about if you want to be a better Irish musician or Scottish or any kind of musician playing for dancers, you need to do a little bit of that dancing. You don't have to be great at it, but you have to do enough that you understand how the dancing works. I would also flip that around. And I do tell this, anybody who wants to come and be an Irish dancer, I say you need to learn your music. And it would be helpful if you learn to play a musical instrument, whatever it is. So my advice has been in the past when people come up to me, and they usually come up to me and say, how can I become an Irish dancer? And I go take lessons. It's not river dance. If you're doing traditional Irish dance, it looks nothing like river dance. It looks nothing like modern competitive Irish dance.
What would you say to the wide-eyed innocents who assumes that they're going to learn to river dance at the Renaissance Fair? How do you say what you do is different than a river dance?
I can answer that very honestly because it happened a lot. I say, well, I teach and learned a much older style of Irish dancing. It is still not Renaissance Irish dancing, but it is Irish dancing from the 1970s and 1980s, which is before there were influences from ballet and influences from cheer, and when the dancing was much lower in style. And a lot of the things that they think are absolutely the most important about Irish dancing are probably not the things that are the most historically authentic. I also will tend to tell them where they can find resources in Irish dance ethnography, including YouTube videos by people such as Dr. Catherine Foley, who started the Irish dance ethnography program at the University of Limerick back in the 70s, because already by then Irish dancing was changing and was getting a lot more outside external influences within it. The other thing that I sometimes tell them is that there were many, many different Irish dance masters back in the 18th and 19th century, and each one of them had their own steps and their own styles that they developed. So Irish dance ethnography has become huge. There's either the schools of competitive Irish dance, whose focus is on modern competitive styles, or there are the Irish dance ethnographers who go out and travel and try to find out as many of these old steps and things as they possibly can. I'll just usually say it depends on what you want to do with the dancing. And then if they can tell me what they want to do with the dancing, then I can go into more depth and more detail and tell them what sources they can go to learn more about whatever style it is that they want to do.
Simon, I cut you off. I'm sorry. You were going to say something more?
I had one thing, from interviewing me that I may have the answer to your question, then I'll go down a long rabbit hole. I'm not going to go down a long one, but a very short little rabbit hole related to that. I'm going to give you an example of the sort of thing that a musician who did a little bit of Irish and Scottish dancing would know, and one that didn't would not know. which is that musicians who've only been playing on the street, have never played for dancers, start playing for dancers. One of the problems that comes up is the difference between a reel and a jig. This is more true of Irish than it is true of Scottish, but I'll greatly oversimplify things. We'll see. We'll see if Shirley gives me a nod and a thumbs up again. Is that in a reel you have 4 notes that go with 3 steps. In a jig, you have 3 notes to go with 4 steps because you've got a skip at the beginning of it. And this is more true of Irish than Scottish because 3s in Irish are step, 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 step. In Scottish, it's a skip change. So there's a little, the Scots will put a little extra skip into something in 2/4, but the Irish, when doing Ceilidh dancing, do not. So this can be a problem if you've got musicians who are used to playing everything at their fastest possible speed. And people will be able to play the downbeats closer together, faster, on a jig because there's 3 notes as opposed to a reel that's got 4 notes. But when you're playing for dancers, again, reels have more notes for fewer steps, and jigs have more steps for a smaller proportion of notes. And so an experienced dance musician will know to kind of take it easy on the tempo on jigs, but sometimes needs to speed up reels. It's actually easier to dance to a faster reel than a slower one. And that affected my tune choice in the shows that I directed. Was a lot of times for a big Ceilidh dance reel, I would choose what some of the older Irish musicians used to call single reels. It's not a term you hear very much anymore. And these are reels with fewer notes in them, such as the Rakes of Mallow, Either One of the Rose Trees. I've noticed since my day, a lot of people end up using Kerry polkas for their reels on stage because they have fewer notes. I was a little more old school, so I like to go research, single reels. Anyway, so that's just a note that a musician who's never played for dancing would never know that to be dancer friendly, you may want to play your reels really fast, or maybe play reels that don't have quite as many notes in them, even though the ones with a lot of notes are flashy. And you might play your jigs a little bit more moderately.
Oh, thank you. That was quite entertaining. Mark, you've been smiling in your corner. So do you have any thoughts on these topics in general?
Oh, lots of thoughts. Let me try a couple. I love playing for dancers. It's one of the most fun games in the world. Basic level, find the lead dancer, follow that dancer. They want to go faster, they want to go slower. But then what gets really fun is when the dancers might take turns doing solos. This dancer likes to go fast. This dancer likes to go slow. Without being obvious about it, just take the tempo a little bit in that direction. It's so fun. One of my favorite ones is when you have a Morris dance, a Morris stick dance, because when the guys start banging sticks, whack, 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 they take turns. One hits one stick and then the other guy hits the other guy's stick in return. That always speeds up. It goes da, 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 da. But then when they start to do the sort of hopping steps, those go slow. Da, 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 da. So this Morris dance has this wonderful game where you're going da 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 da. Then you got to get to da 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 da. So at the end of the phrase, as a musician, you're going to go da 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 da. And so you put in a few notes to both connect the 2 tempos and to tell the dancers where they're going to come up with the pace they want. It's so fun. So that's one of the things.
I remember one of the first things you did at the Renaissance Fair was Morris dancing, Mark.
I did, but it's a more general skill. It applies to really any type of dance. It's that awareness of the pace and the mood and the energy level, right? There's certain dances which have a certain end, right? You want to pull that into the music if you can, both for the fun of that, but also to help encourage the dancers to do their thing. Another reason for knowing the dance. I want to pick up on something the other panelists were talking about as well, and going back to the question of how do I make myself seem to be a better musician than I am? What I would say is do your own research, however humble it might be. In other words, you find you're going to, and this is what they did at the Renaissance Fair of the past, which I think was part of what made it such a marvelous theatrical experience. They would go into these old books and find stuff, and then they just kind of go down that limited rabbit hole and they'd work with it. So you might say, okay, I'm not the greatest musician, but I can read a book, and here are the elements of this Carey style of 1650. I don't know, right? Maybe there's a book about this somewhere. And then I would talk about that. And as part of my show, I might mention that. I would be, in some respects, a better musician for that, and I'd have a story to tell at that show. That's how I would approach that particular challenge.
When you read historical accounts of music, how can you account for what's not written, like say tempo or arrangement, or do you just kind of get a sense of that sounds Elizabethan-y, or where do you get a sense of where's the line between acceptable oldie enough or that's just too modern? And anybody can answer that.
Judgment call. What works? I mean, what's sensible? Look, it's got to play on some level, right? And it's got to please you. So if you're playing at a tempo that's no good, you'll feel it. But there's other clues that'll be in the music. Like, for example, a courant, my understanding was, or some of those old courtly dances, those were done as a matter of physical conditioning. So now you have to picture someone leaping with an aim toward physical conditioning. Well, that's very suggestive then of what the music would be. It's going to have some pretty strong downbeats, we'll say, and it's got to be a certain pace because that's the rhythm of the human body doing that sort of exercise. So a discerning reader could probably fill that in, and that would be an interesting story both for them, it would make the music more effective, and it would be something they could tell to an audience. And in that way, they could very well start to overcome musical limitations.
So
I have
you're
some opinions.
lecturing and giving the historical context to what you're playing directly to the audience in the
I would
course of the performance?
I would call it a story, your connection to the music, and something that people might understand. You can't make too much of it, but you maybe want to give a few dots that people can connect in their mind, or they can ask you about later.
Shirley, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, starting back when Simon was talking, so in terms of the music and hearing the music for dancers, that especially in Irish dance, but also in Scottish dance, as both of these gentlemen know, it depends on the level of the dancer, the skill of the dancer. But if I can back up, to me, when I teach beginning dancers, people who do not understand Irish dance or Irish music, I start out with very simple terms for them. I don't even talk to them about, oh, well, reels are in 4/4 and hornpipes are either a dotted 4/4 or sometimes they're in a 12/8. I say reels go, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. Or they go watermelon, boysenberry, watermelon, boysenberry, watermelon, boysenberry, because I'm not telling them time signatures there. I'm telling them a kind of a little pulse that they can say, that then they can hear something. And I say, so now we're going to listen to some tune as I go, watermelon, boysenberry, watermelon, boysenberry, watermelon, boysenberry, watermelon, boysenberry, right? And jigs become apricot honeydew, apricot honeydew, apricot honeydew, apricot honeydew, apricot honeydew. And then once I've got apricot honeydew down, I go, and now sloop jigs go apricot honeydew cantaloupe, apricot honeydew cantaloupe, apricot honeydew cantaloupe. They'll get it wrong in terms of trying to translate that into a time signature, but if they're not already musicians who can read time signatures, who can go do 5/8, okay, then as just beginning dancers, it helps them hear the pulse and where the downbeat is. And then I found a lot of times, especially for Ceilidh dancers at a certain venue in the Bay Area that I will not mention, it helps them hear the music, at least, even if they really don't understand the music. I sometimes also tell people that hornpipes are heartbeats if they can hear it go. That if they can hear that heartbeat, then that's probably a hornpipe. And that is my just absolute most basic way of trying to present these rhythms to beginning Irish dancers, as well as people who are interested in becoming Irish musicians for dancers.
Let me ask you sort of the same question that I presented to Simon. If you're not a very good Irish dancer, how can you fake it?
Wear a longer costume? No, I don't mean to sound harsh. The thing about Irish dancing is, first of all, historically, it's changed. It has evolved so much. We do not know what Irish dancers looked like in the 16th century. We just don't. There weren't videos around. And even some of our oldest ethnographic resources that we have as dancers don't have this notation that tells us exactly where they did their foot placement. But what I would tell somebody who wanted to become an Irish dancer, besides go learn Irish dance from somebody, and I can teach you some over on the side if you'd like to start, and then recommend some place for you to learn, would be just to understand it's a very precise form of dancing. And that's the one thing that historical sources have always said about it, is that people are very light on their feet and they're very precise.
So that's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line. Be really light on your feet, be precise, know your rhythms, and take some lessons so that you have at least the basics, and take your lessons from somebody who actually teaches Irish dance as part of an Irish dance school, or go online and find some videos that teach Irish dance. And this is really the trick with Irish dancing, is that people see the flash. They see what I call the frosting, and they don't understand that there's cake underneath that frosting. So they want to do all the frosting before they've got their cake to put it on. And that's when you get a hot mess of somebody like Scottish dancing, where people think it's all about waving your arms around and waving your leg around all over the place without any precision. And the whole point of all of these kinds of dancing, I suspect English country dancing too, to a certain extent, I think Patty Blanco, if she's still alive, would agree with me on this, is that you have to be precise with your footwork. Even if you're not doing the fanciest thing in the world, you are precise. This has always been precision dancing, even if it wasn't modern, super athletic. These people had been doing this their whole lives, and they had control over their bodies when they were doing it. And coming from, again, from a folk background, that's the other thing that I can tell you about the music and the dance that I grew up with. Musicians and dancers, we talk to each other, even if we're not actually speaking out loud. We absolutely are in a conversation with one another, giving these little cues, up a little, down a little, a cut. Those are all things that I have in past and do as much as I can.
When you mentioned Patty Blanco, I interviewed a lot of dancers from the Renaissance Fair, and they say that what they got from Patty was that you're there to project that you're having fun, and your job is basically to translate the enthusiasm of dancing Elizabethan-y. It's a spontaneous thing that's sort of happening. Is that your feeling for successful dance shows, Simon, out at the fair?
Well, yeah, I think if you're not having fun, it's going to be hard for anybody else to think that your show is fun. So yeah, it helps if you may be tired, your feet may hurt, but you still love to do this. Let me answer you with a quote from my great uncle, who was a violinist, who was once asked, "What makes a great violinist?" And he said three things. Number one, sincerity. Number two, sincerity. Number three, sincerity. I remember, since I played for Merry Pranksters as well as for Newcastle Country Dancers and Pipe and Bull Morris, I think Patty really, really liked to dance and communicated that to the people in that troupe. So it was really fun playing music for pranksters because they were having fun. Even if they were really tired, we were breathing, tons of dust, and their feet hurt and my fingers hurt, but hey, we're doing it.
Mark, could you add to that discussion?
One thing is there's a great advantage, a great theatrical strength in just having a lot of people on stage who are enthusiastic. That's partly out of love of enjoying things. It's also, it just helps with the support. It's like why theater shows tend to have everyone on stage at the last scene. There's a big wedding, or a scene at court, or whatever it might be. It's theatrically effective, and you can get great mileage from enthusiastic, even beginners, who just want to support a show. It's great exercise in just giving focus and theatrical support, and a bunch of people clapping. One of the stages up north had those upper windows, and there were a couple of troop members there who would simply clap from those upper windows. Absolutely bonkers effective stage-wise. Same thing goes with musicians. You have to make sure they're not getting in the way, but I would do such things as I would like just do a pickup band, people who've hardly played instruments in many years. And if you handle that situation well and just kind of focus it a little bit and let everybody have fun, then that mutual support will come out. You'll have an effective show by the sheer weight of people on stage. No matter how good a performer is, yes, some professionals can pull it off solo, but even those professionals are better if they have a supportive group around them. We're not, by and large, getting rich and famous as Renaissance fairs. We're doing it for fun. Well, that's really fun, and that can be fun for people at all levels.
When you walk around fair and you see other, say, young uns on stage, what are some common mistakes you see them doing that if you were the theater gods, you would land on their shoulder and say, no, this is a bad idea?
It's a valid question for me. But my focus on all of this is we are there for the audience. Otherwise, why are we on a stage with people in front of us? So in order to build a good show as a show director, I hope Mark and Simon agree with me, one of the things that you have to do is set something up so that things change. The pacing changes. You build to something and then you back off of it. You have even an idea of a visual, your choreography, your visual thing that your audience is going to see. Sometimes it's little and beautiful and delicate, and then maybe it all breaks out into something big after that. I used to refer to Shimsa shows. That my visual concept for a Shimsa show was a fireworks display. And that is really what it was. So we would start off with the little ground displays, little things that would come out. And that's where we would put our beginners, among other things, where they were in with a bunch of people and could be safe because there was a lot going on visually. But it was little. And every so often somebody go, ping, ping. And then we would head into the next part where we would go into that next part of the fireworks display where they start sending up big things coming from different directions. And the audience would go, wow, this is amazing. And it's brilliant. And then we would bring it back down again. And if we had just had 3 open champions doing amazing steps, I would send out a beginning dancer doing the sweetest little baby reel in the world with all of us pointing to that dancer going, look at them. Aren't they amazing? They're our beginner dancers. How wonderful are they? And not only did that give that dancer a chance to get all these strokes, right? To feel like, wow, I can really do this. But it also, our audience would just melt. Their hearts would melt. And then we would start building it back up again and go, well, now we've shown you all these light shoe dances. Now we're going to show you something in hard shoes. And we would also give the audience always the credit. We would tell them what we were doing. Now we're going to do a hard shoe dance from County Kerry.
Okay.
We were also the program for what they were about to see. We couldn't hand them a program, so we told them very quickly what we were about to do, just a little bit about where it was from and approximately what era. Like, we've been showing you traditional older dances. Now we're going to show you a modern competitive hard shoe dance. So I might put somebody up doing a traditional hornpipe and then follow that with somebody doing a modern championship level hornpipe and tell the audience what they were seeing. And then at the end of a Shamsa show, if you ever saw one, what we did is we had what we called our finale, where we would put up Scottish dancers, and then we would put up Irish dancers, and we would put up more Scottish dancers, and we would have people popping in and out all over the place until everybody at the end was all dancing at once in this insane hard shoe reel, heavy reel with as many dancers as I could get up there. And we were doing very, 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 very basic steps, the first steps that an Irish dancer would learn in hard shoes, so that everybody could be part of it. But what we left the audience with was this stage filled with dancers making noise, all of them smiling their heads off. And then we would all take hands and raise them up and shout together, we are Shimsa. And so that's what we left them with, was this triumphant thing of everybody in our troupe unified on that stage looking victorious. And that was why we got standing ovations every show we ever did, is because it was also extremely theatrical, thought out in terms of visual mapping with a concept as to what it was going to look like and how it was going to work. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Go ahead.
Can I just jump in?
Go ahead.
I remember that show. I saw it just once and I've never forgotten it. It was absolutely fantastic. It was such a pleasure to watch it. I will always remember it.
And Simon,
Thank
you
you.
wanted, oh,
I'm just agreeing. I can remember in shows where I was the overall director making choices like that during the much of the later 1980s and 1990s. I wasn't directing whole shows of music and dance. I was directing the musical part of it. And I remember how neat it was, for example, with Shelley Montgomery's children as they came up. And yes, and oftentimes that would be an adult would do something really, really flashy, and then you could put Michael or one of her other children out doing something relatively simple. I guess with Clan McCollum, because we had second generation performers, so it would have been effective if what the kids had done was simple and maybe a little sloppy. Only in the case of the kids I'm describing, it wasn't. Because they were both of them second generation dancers, and even at a very tender age, extremely accomplished. But yeah, that kid factor just, wow, look at that, little kid. And that's always good. Yes, you always want to finish, and going for the flashy finish, whatever it might be. And that was different for different ensembles in different years that I was a part of shows, whether I was the director of the show or just the director of the musician. I got as much satisfaction, in some ways maybe more, in directing the musical part of a show where somebody else was directing the dancers. Who had the final say on things wasn't really that important. What was more important was what kind of a show we could put on.
to ask a slightly different question, is it important to have sort of a meta story that the show is not so conceptual as like a fireworks display, but it's more the queen is coming and we're here to present some shows to the queen, or we're here on market day to bring our eggs to the market and we just happen to have a bunch of egg songs to sing. So is it important to have a framing device like that, or is it sufficient to say this is a song from County Kerry where they have these different kind of shoes?
Okay. Well, it's interesting. I approach that very differently from the theatrical side than I do from the musical side.
Mm-hmm.
Theatrical, I'm always looking for some sort of unifying theme. In the show, I want it to be a period concern because it's easier to throw some modern dialogue, or at least clear dialogue, on top of a period concern than it is to try and take a modern show and now put period language on it. Doesn't work very well. So, and then that breaks down to individual scenes. What is a metaphor for this scene? We did one show, and the metaphor was graduation ceremony. It wasn't actually graduation ceremony, but that was our guidance for that. So theatrically, that's how I approach it. Musically, it's not. Musically, we like these tunes. Obviously, we arrange them in a particular way. But how we do it with the story runs, for example, is we have a songboard, and it has basically 8 little Velcro spaces, and our lead singer makes up, here's the set we're going to play this show. And for a while it was, well, the third number is our rustic number, and our opening number is sort of a simple grabber, and we do our penultimate and so forth. And in that sense, there's some theme to it, but it's not organized in terms, usually it's not organized in terms of, well, we're supporting the Queen's visit. No, our act, for what it is sincerity. We love these tunes. We love to present them. Here they are. We hope you like them. And this is what we've chosen to play today. So it's interesting to me that these two ways of thinking about it are so clear to me in the different genres. I see Shirley nodding a lot here.
My thing I wanted to say is, having worked with St. Patrick's as a dancer and then the dance director was very different than being the director of Shimsa, including at Dickens Fair and at various small fairs. And in St. Patrick's, the music and dance, I think it's fair to say, were secondary to the show, and the main part of the show was the plot with Hugh O'Neill doing his thing. to me, those to me were two very different scenarios. One of which is this is a play in which we're playing historical people, and we happen to be putting in some music and dance, and it really almost didn't matter because we weren't going to be able to do historically period music and dance. So we did modern dance and sang modern songs out of a folk tradition, and we didn't worry too much about it. When I was working with Kat Taylor as her dance director and choreographer for the Shawnee show, then Kat and I talked a great deal about that as being like a Stuart mask. And so again, we were very much doing modern Irish dance styles of, in terms of the choreography, bringing in champion level dancers from McBride's school because we had to have a champion to pull off Kat's story. Kat wrote a lot of the music herself, and I wrote with my friend Margaret Olney, who wrote some of the figure dances, but I wrote all the steps that our dancers were doing for that because, again, we wanted to be mindful of Annie and Patricia Kennelly and the other competitive school dancers and not be using their steps without their permission. We did get Annie's permission. But that, again, when I did that choreography, it was all within this framework that Kat and I had talked about of being a Stuart mask. And so a lot of things were very mimetic in a way that modern Irish dancing wouldn't be, because the mimetics that we were doing in the dance were also reinforcing the plot line of the fairy, the little mortal girl who comes into fairyland.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then when I started Shimsa, then that to me, that was my baby. So that was just pure theater and sharing my personal love, along with Ellerin, because if I could talk about Ellerin too much, I'm going to cry. But Ellerin was the Scottish half of the heartbeat for Shimsa Luhala. I was the Irish half and he was the Scottish half when we started it. And what we agreed on above all is that our goal with Shimsa was to present this range of geographic locations and styles as much as we could, to when people walked away, they would have seen something that had a little bit of everything Scottish and a little bit of everything Irish. And we didn't really even care if it was remotely period or not. What I did and he did was we made jokes. We told people a little bit about Irish history and a little bit about Scottish history of what we were doing as part of our patter. But it was not tied in at all with trying to be a Renaissance group, even if we were at Renaissance fairs. This was all about just this amazing history and culture that we wanted the audience to know a little bit about, because most people don't know much about it unless they specialize in it. They have stereotypes, and many of them involve getting drunk.
Well, thank you. To switch gears here, when your wide-eyed innocent comes to you and says, what's the trade-off between passing the hat and getting paid? What do you feel is the more artistically valid sense of accomplishment, if you get paid for the show or you pass the hat?
I'll take that one then. Yeah, get paid if you can. It's much more satisfying. It's much more reliable. Passing the hat, if people really like your performance, well, I'm speaking as a musician now, not as a sword swallower or
Juggler.
strong person or juggler, someone who makes their money that way and needs to be commercially effective. That's not me. I'm a folk musician. It's hard to define what a folk piece is. I read a book where they went on 20 pages trying to define it, and they never got to the answer, at least not in my reading. I think folk music is something that's not propagated because of commercial concerns. Even that's a difficult definition. But if it's not being propagated through commercial concerns, then I'm a very good folk musician, if you catch my meaning. So I would take the payment. And passing the hat is an uncomfortable thing. If you want to do it effectively, you have to push. I don't think it's pleasant. It's not the act I want to put on. So we don't do it. A lot of times we simply forget to even ask for a tip. We even forget to bring our tip jar on. It's not what it's about. And people, if they really like our music, will find a way to buy a CD or tip us anyway. That's my answer.
I was doing an interview with a gentleman named Randolph Scott, and his take first of all, was much the same, is that his feeling towards the audience is one of appreciation for just sitting through the show and being entertained. And he really hates, if you have a complaint about the show, write it on the back of the $20 bill and give it to us. Or the other one is, we've entertained you for half an hour, so as far as we figure out, you owe us something. For him, the worst examples of a pass the hat spiel. And his pass the hat spiel was basically, thank you very much for watching us. If you want to give us something, great. If you don't, please don't feel like you have to. But your applause is good enough. And that sort of resonated with me.
Yeah, I'm appreciative people will even sit down, frankly. There's so many distractions at a festival, and we're rightly or wrongly, we're trying to do art and we're trying to do something we love. If they're kind enough to take time to sit down and watch it, we're grateful.
Mark, we have had enough audiences walk out on us that anybody who makes it to the end, I'm really, really honestly grateful that they made it, especially since we're doing it with an element of art involved and it has an element of risk to it.
And this gets back to what we were saying earlier, right? We're playing these songs because we love them. But there's another way of approaching the entertainment. Involve the audience. Play things that the audience likes, right? It's maybe a more generous way of going it. Sing songs the audience like, even if, they don't quite interest you so much. But that makes people feel good. That would be a very noble approach to entertainment, and definitely a choice.
I can relate to that because, of course, I do a lot of performance that's not at fair. I did and still do. And I would say, if I can respond to a couple of things, I'll respond to Dan, that idea that that sort of theme, the meta story or whatever. I don't think that's essential for a show at a Ren Fair, but I find it very useful, for example, in my solo shows for a museum. My last time in California, I played at Cronenberg Renaissance Fair doing solo shows. And I guess the thing that made me different was I was singing traditional German songs, German sailor songs and traditional Dutch tunes. I was one of the only performers there who was doing something that wasn't English or Gypsy or whatever it was. It's supposed to be a German fair, and I was practically the only person doing anything German or Dutch, High German or Low German. So I didn't need a meta story. It was just, by the way, if you want to hear what German music, some of which was period and some of it was just old, here it is. But when I do a solo show, like on my last trip in June, I did a solo show at Channel Islands Maritime Museum, and my theme was maritime music of California. And that really helped me focus my show. There's a lot of fun music that I do that doesn't really have to do with maritime history in California or the Pacific Basin. And so I just had to leave those things out. And there were some songs that I kind of knew but needed a little polishing.
So getting back to the meta story question.
So I didn't really have a meta story. We did in Clan Colin. We usually do in Clan Mac Colin. Lots of shows I've been in had a meta story, but at Cronenberg I was just me. But what made me different from other entertainers was that more than half of my show came from either the area that became Germany, from somewhere in the Holy Roman Empire, or from the Low Countries, and but for example, for a solo show, I do a lot of solo shows for museums that have a theme. And that theme makes me throw out a bunch of songs. As much as I like them, they don't fit. And then dust off and polish some songs that I haven't done in a while. A couple trips back, I did a show that was a musical history of the U.S. Navy. And so I had to do a lot of dusting off of songs relating to the U.S. Navy from World War I and World War II. The themed, maybe not meta story so much, but a theme to a song, deciding, okay, this show is going to tell you a story about a certain aspect of the history of a place. I like that because it challenges me as a performer. It means, okay, I can't fall back on this really catchy song that has nothing to do with this show. And I'm going to need to polish up, for example, for the naval one, polish up my 20th century material because I don't very often have an occasion to sing it.
Simon, if I can just address you directly, and
Yes.
Mark too. It's really interesting to me because since I did grow up in a folk, what I would call a folk music family,
Yeah.
none of my relatives read standard notation any more than I do. They just knew their tunes. And so one of the biggest issues I have with a lot of contemporary Irish or Scottish or any other kind of folk musicians is they've got to have their little notes in front of them. And it's like, just memorize your damn, there's basic repertoire, just memorize it. What the hell? Because how can you say that you're doing something that is authentically folk if you've got to have sheet music in front of you, especially if you've got it on your iPad or your iPhone? It's like, how is this supposed to be, period? Drives me nuts. Thank you for letting me rant.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. And it's funny how coming from different places, like I came to folk and traditional music. You grew up in that. Now, what I grew up in spite of having a professional musician as a great uncle, my parents both did theater and I was a child actor. And so I sought out this music, but I had the same feeling. I look at a show today and they've all got headset mics and it's like, how would this show be if we just took off your headset mics and listened to you project? And again, it's like coming from a theatrical point of view, if you've memorized a script or at least your cues and your lines from a script, memorizing the lyrics to a ballad with a lot of verses is not rocket science, as you're saying. But you gotta use the noggin. You gotta take the effort, do the homework, sing that song to yourself or your pets or whatever until you can perform the whole song in front of an audience and without screwing up too often.
I learn things by ear because I grew up learning things by ear. So I get it that it's not everybody wants to do it. But to me, it's really important if you're saying that you're doing something, especially if you're saying that you're doing something that's historically accurate, that stuff has no place in things where before sheet music and especially before electronic devices became common. It's like, it can't even remotely be a period if you've got to have this aid on it, because that's not what people were like back then.
I'd love to chime in on that one if I may. I think with traditional music, you have to be off the page. For one thing, the best parts of the music are typically not on the page. The best part might be a catch in the bowing. It's a particular upbeat that feels right. It's a tempo indication where the resonance of your arm and the fiddle goes in a particular way. That's not going to be in the sheet music. That's one thing. Nowadays, you can get 20 versions of an Irish tune at the press of a button. Okay, some of them are going to have that kind of, what do you call it, kismet to them, and some are not. Some are going to miss the mark. How do you know the difference? Because, be careful what you read and what you stick in. I think be careful what you curate. And that's another reason for being off page, so that you do it, because you're not going to be reading the one way to play the tune. The odds are excellent that it's not going to be the right way of playing the tune. Like I look at a book at O'Neill's music. It's like the best, or one of the best compendiums of Irish traditional music, but it doesn't have that flick of the wrist or whatever indicated. You just got to know. It doesn't tell, hey, put an ornament here, don't put an ornament there. Right. So that's part of it. And then, of course, theatrically, it's just horrible focus if everyone's like in their books. And I did a workshop recently of stage skills for musicians. One of the first things is focus. Well, you can't be looking at your music stand. I even gave an example of a music stand ruining a show. It's very easy to picture that and paint that scenario. Okay, so that's my part of the rant, Shirley.
Oh, thank you. No, I agree. And also, just if you've got your nose stuck in sheet music, you can't see if a dancer just fell down.
Right.
Oh, that said, okay, now let me give the
Anyway.
pros of sheet music. You can get a lot done quickly, right? And for certain situations, that is the right thing. And if you're playing tunes, or if you want to get together on your ornaments, which by the way sounds better than everyone playing their own version of the ornaments on slightly different versions of the tunes, then you want some written music just to save a whole lot of time.
Yeah, I can see that.
And Shirley, what role did sheet music play in your performance / rehearsal procedures?
Richard was the only one on sheet music. Shay would show up. Somebody else, would show up from outside. And we didn't have sheet music. The only person was Richard. And all the rest of us just played. And there were variations, is Darcy here? Well, then Darcy's going to play fiddle this way. If it's somebody else, they're going to play fiddle that way. And we just rolled with it because the music, as traditional folk music, the music is strong enough and it's flexible enough that it can survive that. In fact, I think it thrives on that. That's just my opinion from growing up with people who didn't play from sheet music and got along just fine. But they weren't recording. So.
Yeah. I actually had 2 points. One of the things I had to say is almost identical, though, from a different perspective to what Shirley said, which is because in the last 25, 30 years since I worked fairs, I've continued to work in music, but in some different ways. One of the main things I do is I teach both beginners and more advanced students fiddle and other instruments. So this question comes up of sheet music versus ear. The way I like to explain it to my students, there's different ways of inputting the data. And one way is visually to read it off of sheet music. Another way is to listen to the tune, kind of hear what the high points are, and then fill in the gaps and pick it up by ear. For myself, I picked up music both ways. I started off as a reading musician. Obviously, I had to read and write music and to get a music degree, especially from Berkeley. But at the same time, I was going to Irish sessions and old time music sessions, and without a tape recorder, learning tunes just by hearing them, trying to figure out, okay, where the hills and valleys are, and then fill them in. I think both of those ways of inputting the data are very valuable. And I can say that there are a lot of situations I've been in where the ability to deal with both is really valuable. So I encourage my student. I sometimes say, I'm not interested in learning to read music. That's fine. I'll teach you to play fiddle without reading music. But if you do decide to learn at least a little bit about reading music, just enough to like piece your way through the tunes and then put the book aside and play, it will help you learn new tunes and new genres of tunes that you might not have heard otherwise. But ultimately, you have to listen to people playing it to really understand the style.
May I make one more comment to Simon?
Please,
And all
please.
you guys. Simon, you just reminded me that I wanted to mention Sean. My
Yes,
spouse, Sean. And
yes, yes.
Sean is like you. He's classically trained. He reads like wizard. He was a music major, so he knows music theory inside and out. And I felt like I was always blessed that Sean and I, even before we got married, we were always a team. And I always used to say, as long as O'Brien shows up, I'm good. I got a show. And that was because Sean has that versatility that you have, that he can sight read, he can transpose, he can do all those things as a music major and as a longtime classically trained musician, but he also understands folk music. So he becomes my translator sometimes when I
Right.
just can't get the message across to people. He'll go, well, here, Shirley willed it for me, and I'll do it. And go, okay, and then he'll translate that for me.
Stepping back from this level of detail, I'd like to pull the focus back a little bit and just consider what would be ideal songs for the young'un to perform in their soon-to-be hit show of either Scottish, Irish, or English music. So if you could give me 5 surefire Scottish songs that always have worked for you, and what are they, and what's a good opening tune, and what's a good rousing finale song?
Write a five song, but this is including dance as well, right? This is a musical dance.
Give me however you want to phrase it. I mean, it could be music, dance, singing, but just the wide-eyed innocent that we started with now would just like 5 songs that he can give to his or her friends and do just a really fun, entertaining set. That's vaguely period.
Well, you want hills and valleys. So you should probably, I would say, start with a dance number that has most or all of your dancers dancing. That could be a country dance. Gene Weston worked at the Southern Fair for a while, and she wrote Scottish country dances that were pointed towards the audience. And those dances were very theatrical. Those made really good openers and closers, because a lot of Scottish country dance is sort of looking within to the group of 6 people or occasionally 8 people. A lot of Scottish dance is inwardly focused. There's Irish dancing, which it's easier to make a show with Irish dancing. Even the Ceilidh dancing sometimes has a direction, but the direction for a lot of Scottish dancing is mostly within the group. So I would say there would be certain things you would need to do. People love watching people dance with swords. And so Gilly Column is the sword dance that is most familiar over 2 crossed swords. So there'd be a dance with sword. Now, at different times, we've had different sword dances. There was a very flashy one in the McCollin show in the 90s where it was 4 women, because we didn't have that many men who could pull it off. So we did it with 4 women. So they're making a much larger cross and they're dancing around it. Fraser Longswords, I think it's called. So you need valleys as well as hills. So at some point, I think there should be a song. If you've got somebody with the voice and the stage presence to carry it off, it'd be great to have one person do an unaccompanied song and everybody on stage is focused on them. Sometimes you can get an audience to also be a little quieter and pay attention. Sometimes you can't. So sometimes the song may be an ensemble song, which means in the Scottish tradition, a lot of the really old material, we have material from the Renaissance period, but they're mostly these ballads with anywhere from 12 to 30 verses. So those are a little harder. You're going to want to have some ensemble numbers to get really traditional and quiet with a song. Maybe you can. It depends on where you're doing the show. If you're doing the show on Caravansary stage, you could have an unaccompanied solo. So several shows I worked in over the years on the Caravansary stage, we had one person sing a song. In Irish, in a couple of cases, not in English. Jim Duran and Robert, what was his last name? They could do that. They could hold the audience's attention on the Caravansary stage, but that may not work on the Ben Jonson stage. On the Ben Jonson stage, you might have to have somebody sing a verse and then everybody sing a chorus.
Shirley, I saw you raise your hand, so
I can give you 6 songs or tunes.
Okay, please.
All right. So if you've got a piper, ask him to play the Black Bear. Yes. For tunes that people will know or that have been around for a long time, The Deal Among the Tailors, classic Scottish tune. Mrs. MacLeod of Rossay, also known as Miss MacLeod's, also known as Did You Ever See the Devil, Uncle Joe? The Jig of Slurs is a fabulous tune. Gilly Callum, as Simon mentioned, from mouth music, Bratach Bana. People can usually pick it up. And I will stop singing, but there you go. So those would be my things that I would say. If you got the people who can do it, you put those in. And the Strathspey, Lord George of something or other, I'd have to look that one up, but there's an amazing Strathspey. This starts out with Lord George.
And Mark, what's your...
This is not quite my genre, but close enough. I would also second Gilly Column. That's great. Sword dancing in general, Slate's sword dance in English setting, the courtly clashes with the courtly dances. Yes, it's good stuff. I think if I wanted to just do a show at an event, even if it weren't particularly well supported theatrically, I would look toward a dance show. Absolutely. It's going to be much more theatrical and much more engaging, less of a commitment for the audience to watch for a few moments. When we get into country dances, there's some lovely English country dances that have good energy, maybe a story to them. Maiden Lane has a fun dance to it, for example. Confess is kind of a flirty dance that's interesting. And there's a couple others. Those are good tunes. What's the one that has such fast changes? Oh, I don't remember which one it is. Stingo. That's just fun to see the dancers do their thing. And just to have that huge ensemble energy that comes across in a dance show. Music show is harder that way. Music show, I think there's a contradiction between being period and having a lot of popularity. I don't think these things fit very well together unless, again, the event supports it tremendously. If you are at a more general event, well, fun songs, drinking songs, body songs, songs with an audience, chorus, things like that go over well. If you want to do,
Can I
you know,
give you a curveball?
please.
Let's just say you guys have been hired to stand in the corner and it's a holiday party and they say, we just want not Christmas songs, but a traditional, give me, five Renaissance-y sounding songs you can sing in the corner while people are eating cheese and drinking wine.
Well, again, there's two questions there. You're giving the background music scenario. There's also a featured scenario. So we'll talk about the background music scenario. Doesn't matter so much what you sing. You just make it sound pretty. Your voices blend. You don't get too exciting. We used to do a song with the carolers, and the verse literally goes, no matter what the words we sing, most people never hear, so we can sing just anything, and it will still bring cheer. And that was actually what the lyrics were, and nobody ever noticed. So that's that situation. You just make it, bring us forth the table and set it with a cloth. Sicken us your rabbit dog, but please wipe off the froth. This is good company humor. Nobody ever noticed that either because we were just singing background. So that's the direct answer to your question, Dan. Doesn't matter.
In my case, the direct answer to your question is unless they were offering me a lot of money, I wouldn't take the gig. It's not my kind of gig. My kind of gig is where I get the audience to sing along with me, which means it's going to be, drinking songs and join in. And the closest that I ever did was a gig that I did with Craig Johnson, where we basically did the circle tour of Ireland through music and singing. And so we went back and forth between singing a song and playing a tune from every county in Ireland around. So we did that for fun. But I just wouldn't do a gig like that because if the audience isn't going to be in there interacting with me, it's not my kind of thing.
Well, they'll pay you well, though. At least sometimes they will. Oh, yeah.
We'll go and finagle them into singing with us on old Warhorse songs.
I have a term for that kind of gig, by the way, which is musical wallpaper gigs.
Aha.
And I've done a lot of them, actually. I play the local country club on Valentine's Day, with a fiddle.
I'm a theater major. If I can't sucker the audience in, I'm not interested.
Well, people did get involved. It's funny, when I did that, some people really got, well, for one thing, they'd make requests. And if I could play the request, I would. And at that point, there is involvement. But at the end of the day, as far as taking musical wallpaper gigs, if you've got the money, honey, I've got the time.
Mark, you had another
Sorry, Mark.
sort of one step up from the wallpaper.
Yeah, well, if I were going to try and do a fair show with a lot of singing and really entertain people with period music, I think this is part of the one prompt. How would you do it with period music? I do madrigals and try and make it funny. This is what Good Company did. This is actual period music. It's great music. It's really interesting musically, and there's a lot of humor in it. Fire, fire, my heart, and call for help, but none comes nigh me. Just imagine a group of people hamming it up. This is good. This is good stuff. If we get into folk music that's not written down, that's hard because for one thing, as you were noting with your discussion with Simon, that music really was very meager before about 1600 because printing came so late. Well, came later to England than it did to the continent. The songs we pass off as period, even in our show, are typically broadsides. Some of them from the 1920s. We do one that's from the 60s, Wild Mountain Time. High on the list, I think, of crowd pleasers. Sounds authentic. It's arguably from period sources, but it doesn't go back very far in the written record.
How far back does the chicken song go?
That is period. My Little Hen, that's
Yeah.
German, and I will guess it's German madrigal from around 1650, something like that. It's close enough, I would say. Maybe Simon knows that one. My Little Hen, mein Henlein Weiss, I think it's called.
It's a song where everybody
my little hen, she's looking for her, she's looking rooster proud. And oh, listen to her talk, and then she lays an egg. This is great stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know that song. I know a couple of other. Ravenscroft wrote a song, about birds and things. Again, in the English tradition, we've got more to go on. In my interview with Dan, I talked about that, the difference in source material, that for English country dance, we have Playford's English Dancing Master of 1651. And it's a little bit like that, with Irish and Scottish material, where with the Scottish material, we have tunes from the 18th century because a lot of Scottish fiddlers were literate and wrote down their tunes, and even collections of tunes were published. But getting back to the 16th century, no, just don't have so much. And then Irish material, a lot of that material, Edward Bunting collected harp music starting in 1790, but we don't start getting collections of dance tunes really until the Petrie collection in the mid 19th century. So it's different. Putting together a Renaissance fair show using English material is different from Scottish, is different from Irish, because the antiquity of our written down source material is amazingly rich for England.
What do you think accounts for the predominance of English country dance in the written record?
That there's this extraordinary thing where the Puritans take over government, and we think that may have been the social pressure that caused John Playford to collect and write down these dances, which had been passed on orally up to that point. But that doesn't happen in Scotland for a couple centuries later. It doesn't happen in Ireland till a few centuries later. People start writing down how people are doing folk dances.
Can I just tag onto that very briefly? The other thing in Ireland and Scotland, as well as other countries, is, you're talking about people who couldn't just jet back and forth across the island or from one part or another. So there are a lot of different regional variations. I mean, Shetland music sounds nothing like Donegal music, which sounds sort of like a cross between Irish music and Scottish music. And so there's just so much there that was lost because it wasn't recorded. And we've tended over the decades to smush it all together. But there's a lot in there. If we're trying to play the Renaissance, then you're talking about people whose styles of playing back then were probably even more different than they are now. And tunes that weren't as common quite yet, because while there were travelers, there weren't people traveling around spreading them quite as much. So that becomes the other challenge, at least as far as we were always concerned.
I'm trying to come up with the way I normally end these podcasts is I've made up a totally fictional award called the Phyllis Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in applying fair stuff to their life outside of fair. So congratulations, you've just won that award in the newly created English, Irish, Scottish folk music tradition category. Give me your acceptance speech.
All right. I am grateful to Phyllis Patterson for always insisting on some connection, and ideally a deep connection to period material. It makes a better show. It makes a better theme. It makes better details. It's helped my writing tremendously. I've benefited from that, and the focus that it encourages. From focus comes creativity. Because, and a lot of people have remarked on this, the more the constraints, the more the room for creativity. So I'm very grateful for that artistic focus that I got at such a young age in such a wonderful, rich environment. As to the folk songs, particularly, 1600 is not that long ago. It really isn't. And the people in those days, we think of ourselves as we're more sophisticated. We know so much more about things. But the people had day-to-day concerns like they did. And maybe they didn't know about space travel, but they knew all about love. They knew all about constraints of class. They knew about limitations of society and social pressure. And when we have those details in a song, it's really interesting to me because I can start to place myself into that situation and say, oh, I recognize this person. What would I do in that situation? These songs are very touching to me without all the high tech movie effects, because I can imagine that, and it strikes me very deeply. I work with this material a lot, and I translate songs, I adapt them, and so forth. And we're trying to make a connection to the past. And what's interesting to me on that is, okay, I'm in a sense co-authoring with this or that person, right? Even though they don't get to criticize me as they would in modern life. But why are they there and why am I here? Because I could be that person. I could be that scholarly person working on material and adapting and shaping their hands, shaking the text with that. And I kind of think, oh, that's me. So that's the connection, one of the connections I feel to this music, and that I think my bandmates feel.
Okay. Thank
So
you
I
very
want
much,
to
Mark. I
focus on
like
it.
that a lot, by the way.
That was
Mhm.
beautiful, Mark. First of
Yeah,
all,
it
that
was.
was exquisite. I kind of don't want to go after that, but Simon's probably going to be even better, and I don't want to come after both of you.
Oh, don't raise your hopes too much.
No, I'm I'm going to focus on one of the things that Phyllis always said was part of, and Kevin still says is part of what FAIR does, and that is to trick into learning with a laugh. Because I think we all know that Phyllis was a school teacher, and I've been a teacher most of my life. Um, but what I loved about this music when I first encountered it, as well as the theater and the poetry, is that it speaks from the heart. But it speaks to things that still concern us today. They're very human. These songs, these tunes, especially Irish tunes, they're about little things that you see in life. They're about a little rabbit running along the hillside, or the kid on the mountain. You can hear the little goat. So they're very deeply connected to nature in a way that we don't always get today when things are so intellectually constructed sometimes, I think. So just that very fact that these are about people who, in the case of the Irish in particular, later on had very hard lives. Um, they speak to a universality of how people feel, love lost, or frustration, or joy found, or oh my God, the beautiful, the pretty girl over there that I'm putting the eye on, right? So I love that about them, which is that they take us back to who we are as human beings. Um, and that's one of whether it's Irish or English or Scottish, but I have a fondness in particular for Irish, obviously. And that was what drew me to them, is the absolute universality and the humanity in these songs and these tunes. I can hear I can hear nature in the tunes sometimes, or I can hear the little creature. So it is that bounding back to life, but also tricking into learning with a laugh. They're very accessible, they're easy for people to like. And when we present them in the right situation with care, that we are not giving the audience too much, but we're giving them a little bit at a time and inviting them into our worlds this way, then they come away with something, and maybe they'll go out and explore it more now because we gave them a little piece of something and encourage them to go out and become involved with it.
Well, you met the bar very nicely. I was like that a lot. Very cool.
I don't think I can rival either the the poetic quality or the profundity of my two colleagues. But while that question was posed, my wife came up and was like whispering things to me, and this may seem irrelevant, but she was pointing out, "Hey, you met me through this music, through a Ren Fair. It was a Ren Fair in Texas, but that was how we met. We met as stand partners playing early music." And then as she said that to me, I thought about Mark and Shauna and
Right.
Shirley and Sean. And, when you look at the things that make us happy, that make us fulfilled as human beings, there's nothing like being partnered with your soulmate. And um, all three of us I know have met people that we really connect with on so many different levels. And how did we meet? through this music at fair. So maybe that's not a direct answer to your question, but I think Mark and Shirley answered it so well that all I can offer is sort of this, um, this fringe benefit that if it hadn't been for doing music at fairs, I don't think any of the three of us would have met our soulmates with whom, we're spending the rest of our lives.
Or we
Or
wouldn't have
met
met
each
each other
other.
either.
That's
Yeah.
true. Very true.
Well, I
That
think
is so right on. That is so right on.
Well, I think that makes a perfect time to bring this panel discussion to a close. Thank you, Mark, Simon, and Shirley, for giving so freely of your time and knowledge. And with that, I bring to a conclusion this episode of Fair Folk at Work. If you have a question or comment you'd like me to pass along to either Mark, Simon, or Shirley, you can email me those comments at djng@earthlink.net. If you or somebody you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, you can email me, Dan McLaughlin, at djng@earthlink.net. If you have any questions or comments about the podcast itself, guess what? You can email me them at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye bye.